Hi, this is the Thinking Critically About Geography presentation that you will complete on the week of Thursday, February 21st. It is my favorite presentation because, as you might remember, I am a cultural geographer by bachelor's degree and have always been fascinated by maps and culture and how people settle where they are and how people use the land where they live and religion and all kinds of crazy things that we all maybe take advantage of or might not be very familiar with until we get into it and learn about it. So we're just going to touch on some of that stuff in this particular presentation because unfortunately there isn't enough time to go as deeply into it as I would like. But we're going to talk specifically about maps and some of the specific parts of geography. And along the presentation, I will ask that you either pause the presentation and complete some of the pieces that are asked of you to do, or at the end of the presentation, complete those things throughout the presentation, and then bring that work with you on March 7th when we meet again face-to-face. I also apologize for my voice in this particular presentation. I do feel that I have the flu this week, so I'm real glad we're not meeting face-to-face. Hopefully, I'll make it through this without coughing my head off, but there may be a moment of pause or maybe a moment of coughing if indeed I have to take a break. So here we go. Thinking about critical geography or thinking critically about geography, starting with mental maps. You will have to teach social studies to your elementary kids. And one of the things in the elementary social studies TEKS is that your students will create mental maps. So I want you to think about that first. I want you to think about our campus, our Texas State campus in Round Rock, and where it is, and what's around it. Excuse me. And then I want you to think about where that campus is relative to other places. Where is our campus compared to the main campus in San Marcos? Where is it in comparison to or relative to Austin? And specifically, just to pinpoint a location, how about downtown Austin? Or what about San Antonio? How far is our campus from your home? Take a moment, pause the presentation, write down your thoughts about relative location of our Round Rock, Texas State University campus, and start thinking about the mental piece of that. Where are we when we're on our campus? Now, what I want you to do is once you've unpaused after answering those questions, I want you to create your own mental map. And I want it to be a map of your bedroom, wherever you sleep at night. So on a blank sheet of paper with a pencil, because in case you need to erase for scale or something, draw a map or construct a map of your bedroom and the surrounding areas. Some people think of surrounding areas as the entire neighborhood. Some think of the other rooms in the house. If you think of your bedroom and its relative location to the bathroom, maybe that's the map you want to create. If you think of your house or your bedroom in a house that's in a neighborhood of other houses, maybe that's what you want to draw on your map. Excuse me again. On this map, though, I do want you to start thinking about those things that are required on any map you see. So there needs to be a title. There needs to be a key with symbols. So the symbols are going to identify something in the room or the surrounding area, and I need you to identify what those symbols mean with a key. Include your compass rose, which is the north arrow, a scale showing the distance between things or the size of things, and anything around that you're adding to your map. Make sure to label or name those things. It could be the other rooms in the house. It could be what's outside in your neighborhood. It could be, if you're going outside of your neighborhood, bodies of water or other buildings or restaurants or a bus stop or something that you want to include on your map. Excuse me. Once you've done that, on the back of your map, I want you to answer these two questions. What's your rationale for including some of the features of your room and the other map components? Why did you put these things on your map? And then I want you to think about why you took some things away or why you didn't add some things to your map. For example, if you added your bedroom but didn't draw your closet, why didn't you draw the closet there? Talk about that on the back of your map, and these answers to these questions you'll bring with you on the 7th of March. Again, you can pause the presentation or continue on through the presentation and come back to this to complete the work as it's finished. Now I want you to think like a teacher. You're going to be in a classroom with elementary kids, and according to the NCSS, or the National Council for Social Studies, K through 4 are expected to construct mental maps of their locales, their regions, and the world so that they can demonstrate that they understand how things are located relatively to each other or directionally to each other, and specifically size and shape. They need to be able to interpret, use, and distinguish various representations of the Earth, such as maps, globes, and photographs. So knowing this as a teacher and going into a classroom where I'm asking you to think about how you're going to integrate social studies and reading specifically, or other subjects, how could you use a map if you were teaching or reading a book? How could you get students to draw a map if you're reading a book? And what about the idea of using scale and figuring out the math of the scale that you would need to put on a map if students were drawing, so you could integrate math and reading with just the idea of drawing a map? So I want you to think about these questions. Answer them on a separate sheet of paper than the map that you just drew, because I want you to think differently than if you were drawing a map. Because here, again, you're thinking like a teacher. I want you to think about how you're going to balance various social studies subjects as an elementary teacher. And that's not necessarily integrating reading and science and math with social studies. This is all of those components of social studies and what makes up the topic or the big header of social studies. How are you going to balance teaching all of that? What areas of geography are you weak in? I don't like physical geography. To me, physical geography was very, very difficult, and a lot of it was because of the very deep science. But I'm fascinated by geology and weather, which all fall under physical geography. So I'm weak in it, and I wouldn't feel confident teaching it, but I know that I'm interested in it and would definitely move on into that if someone was a good enough teacher to teach me. And then how can I teach geographical concepts to my students in a meaningful way? This, I think of reading a book and having students draw a map of the setting of the book. That's one way that you can do that. It gets your kids thinking about place and relativity. It gets people or children thinking about where things are. It can be a divider between an imaginary place and a real place. Lots and lots of things can go into how you would teach and use geographical concepts in your teaching. Oh man, sorry for the coughing. These are map words, and what words should be included on every single map. Some maps that I'll even show you today doesn't have this stuff on it. It could take away the credibility of the map without these things. So if you can't believe what you're looking at, then you have to be able to analyze what you're looking at. If you start with the things that should be on a map and understand that if someone's taken the time to draw a map and give information in a map representation, and they put all of these things on it, then they're more credible than some who would not do these things. So there should be a title, a scale, specifically noting distance, orientation, north, south, east, and west, a border or borders, a legend to define all the symbols, who wrote or designed the map, or credits to the person who created it, and then a locator map if there needs to be one. Locator maps come into play whenever the size of the piece that you're looking at in the larger map needs something within it needs to be broken down into a smaller part. That locator map is that smaller map where you can look at more detail at something that is located on a bigger map. Think of a map of England, a map of the United Kingdom, and you take the city of London out, and it's in a more specifically detailed in a smaller locator map within that bigger map of the United Kingdom. So, as I mentioned, without these things on a map, without the credits to who created the map, without some kind of credibility behind it, we have to be able to critically analyze a map and its purpose. Why did somebody create this map? There can be bias in maps that we see, and I want you to be able to understand that you are adopting a perspective when you look at a map, and I want you to be able to analyze and recognize bias in maps, or at least understand that there should be some questions about every map you see. This one I thought was kind of funny. Note that the only specific piece that should be on a map is the title. There isn't a scale, there's not compass rose, there's not direction. None of those other things are on this map. So obviously somebody created this as a joke. If you're from Texas, I'd like to know how you feel about this map. If you're not from Texas, and I think of Marilyn in this point, Marilyn coming from California, I want to know what you think about this map. It's kind of funny to me. Obviously, not something to be taken seriously, and you certainly wouldn't use this in a classroom of kids if you were teaching about, Texas or the United States. This would certainly confuse a child, although it might make a native Texan pretty proud. So when analyzing a map, when you look at a map, there are a whole bunch of questions you should ask. And the first is, what is this map trying to tell me? What story is the map or the map maker or the cartographer trying to tell? Is there any special interest this person is trying to advance? Or is it trying to marginalize something or a group of people or a place? Does it perpetuate or challenge existing political or social goals, issues, or interests? What might the map imply by assumptions, commitments, and values of its maker? And what's your reaction to them? What's your reaction to a map that you might be looking at? This map is by Mercator, and you might have studied Mercator maps as a kid. They are the most frequently used when showing a wide map of the world or the globe. You'll notice some things on this map, hopefully, that might be a little out of whack. Take a look at it and see what you think. What might be a little expanded? The good news is this map does include New Zealand. Some maps actually forget to include New Zealand. Well, after looking at it and thinking about what is wonky about this map, let's look at an example. This is just an outline map of the same thing, but I want to show you that that's Greenland, where that orange arrow is pointing. Greenland is not that big. In fact, it's only 0.8 square million miles. There's Africa, which is 11.6 square million miles. But according to Mercator's map, they're about the same size, which isn't true. Greenland's actually a fairly small country. Africa is a continent with a bunch of countries within it, and it's much, much larger than Greenland. There's also South America, 6.8 square million miles. If you look at the comparison between Greenland, also very similar in size according to Mercator. So, the world according to Mercator, Alaska is nearly as large as the continental US. Greenland is roughly the same size or larger than Africa or South America. Europe, excluding Russia, is only a bit larger than South America. Antarctica, which is the one at the bottom that was all white, dwarfs all continents. In reality, Alaska can fit into the continental US at least 3 times. Greenland can fit inside Africa about 14 times. South America doubles Europe's landmass. Antarctica is the 3rd smallest continent. This is a map of, it's called the PALL, P-A-L-L, Gall, G-A-L-L, Gall-Peters map. And the makers of this map were evangelicals who used this map to indicate where there may be missions that they would go to. Notice the size differences in certain places on this map. What do you see? Compared to Mercator, there are some places that are wonky, but different than what we noticed on the Mercator map. Greenland up at the top is actually white, and it's a bit smaller than the way Mercator had indicated it. The United States, Canada, and Mexico look fairly small compared to South America. Africa looks huge. By knowing that this Gall-Peters map was created by evangelicals and seeing the difference in South America and Africa versus the rest of the map, the perspective being from a religious standpoint would lend me to think that the people making this map focus on South America and Africa as destination points for missions and missionaries. There's perspective in this. There's bias in this. And if you were looking at this map and you didn't know that there were differences in these continent sizes, then you might believe something that is wrong. So think about every map you look at and ask those analytical questions about what's the purpose of this map, who created this map and why. Are they trying to send a message or tell a message that's either social, political, or so on? This one specifically is pretty important in showing perspective. Notice that Australia, down on the right-hand side, the map cuts off New Zealand, so there's no New Zealand on this map. In your classroom with your kids, you can make maps or share maps of different styles. 3D Play-Doh maps are really great. You want your kids using their hands every chance they can. They love doing that. When they can create something on their own, they tend to absorb the information or the data better. So using Play-Doh it can get kind of messy, but that's okay. It's an elementary school classroom. It's a real easy way to get your kids to reconstruct maps that you might want your students to create. You can do school or campus walks and have your kids identify places along the way, and then maybe create a map once they got back to the classroom. And then have students make critical observations about building construction. Why are shopping centers larger than schools? Why is the office in the school smaller than a classroom, and that sort of thing. Sorry. Sports maps are always fun. Kids tend to get into this sort of thing, especially if they have some allegiance to some place because of a parent who went to a school, or has some allegiance to a sports team, or an older brother or sister who goes to a school or some other destination to play sports. Sports is a big deal to kids, so something like this might be interesting to them. And I like this one specifically because you can kind of break it out into states and at least show students the states within the United States based on the universities that are included here. Site maps are also very important. You could show images of sites on a map just to give the idea of that this is what occurs culturally in this particular place. You see the Great Wall of China on the left. You see the Taj Mahal in India on the right at the top, and Chichen Itza, which is in Mexico, on the bottom right. The Chichen Itza pyramid can also be part of Aztec and Mayan discussions. If you're in 6th grade and you're teaching cultural geography, cultural history, that is one of the things that you will get into. In geography, there are 5 themes, and these are the overarching categories within geography that you would learn. I think some of you have been through the World Geography class at ACC. Some of you have. If you haven't, these are the things that you would have learned, hopefully. Location. Location, where we are, where we live, is part of human geography. Where we live determines everything for us. We don't live in the desert because it's hard to grow food there, but we do grow abundant food if we live near a river or near some waterway. So location is super important when it comes to thinking about culture and where and why people live where they do. So maps, place names, absolute location, which is longitude and latitude, relative location to other things, and then how dense is the location, how concentrated is the location, and what patterns of settlement do we see in locations. Cultural ecology is the makeup of culture. What is the cultural landscape of where you live? What does the environment determine? How does the environment determine how people live? For example, that same thing I just mentioned about we don't live in the desert because we can't grow food, but if we lived near a river, we could. The environment around us and how does it determine how we live? Part of cultural ecology. How possible is success? And by success, I mean human continuing the species in an environment. And then environmental modification. How do we change our environment to make it hospitable to the way we live? Regions are part of geography. We all live in different regions. If you think of the United States divided out into its regions, Texas is considered the southwest region of the United States. Georgia would be the southeast version of or region of the United States. So there are distinctive characteristics in each region. An area with location boundaries and other things that would determine what the area is. There are formal, functional, and perceptual regions within a region. And some regions can be seen in hierarchy. If you think of the Northeast in the United States, where there's New York City, there's Washington, D.C., Boston, Massachusetts, lots of history, lots of money in those areas, you think of that region as sort of higher on the food chain than some other regions in the United States. Just think of the comparison between the Northeast and the Southeast, and how the Southeast region has been not part of the hierarchy, or on the low end of the food chain for many, many, many years since the United States has been settled. So regions can be seen in hierarchy. Place is that part of where we live, that place where we live. It includes our culture and the region, the traits, the system of culture, the realm of culture, how we live in our place. And then the physical processes of place, like what's the climate? What's our vegetation? How's the soil? And can we grow things in it? What are the landforms around us that could be a barrier or a boon to a place? Movement is how we as people move. There are cultural hearths, and think of that as like little Cuba or little Havana in Miami, a little place where people of the same culture and beliefs all live in one place. Cultural diffusion is where culture spreads out in a region. Think of Cinco de Mayo in cultural diffusion. Cinco de Mayo has its own purpose and celebration, but we as a nation pretty much have adopted this celebration, even though most of us have the information about why we celebrate Cinco de Mayo as wrong. That's an example of cultural diffusion. A celebration within the Mexican culture has become diffused to the point where everyone, let's say everyone in Texas, celebrates Cinco de Mayo now. Expansion would be part of diffusion. How does it go out? How does it diffuse? Well, it can be contagious, where and specifically think of viruses and how viruses diffuse out into a culture or a movement. Hierarchical, who moves? You think of which group has the ability, the money, the resources to diffuse out. And is there a stimulus that forces a culture to move or a group of people to move? Was it a hurricane, like in New Orleans with Hurricane Katrina? Many, about 60% of the population of New Orleans diffused out of New Orleans because of that stimulus, that hurricane that destroyed so much of the town. So you think of why people move and who's moving and how they get out. Relocation could be migrant diffusion, like what we're seeing right now from Central America, and people coming up to the border to attempt to come into the United States to find better lives and safety. Acculturation and transculturation, and then cultural barriers. What are barriers that stop us from movement? Okay, that's it for this one. Anything that I've asked you to do, meaning like the mental maps and the drawing map, and any questions that I want you to answer, like thinking like a teacher on that one slide, take care of those before we meet again on the 7th. And I will answer questions for you if you have them. So let me know if you need anything, and I'll see you on the 7th. Thanks.